When the Syrophoenician woman came to Jesus in Mark 7:26, Jesus intentionally did not go into Phoenicia. But in Acts 1:8, Jesus told the disciples that they would purposefully go beyond Samaria to the uttermost part of the earth. The Apostle Paul spent 3 years in Arabia before going to Jerusalem, then went into Syria and Cilicia, which is the long coastline north of Phoenicia. Men from Cyprus, such as Barnabas, took the gospel to Antioch, the third largest city in the world. Between the miracle of Pentecost and Paul's missionary journeys, the gospel exploded into modern-day Turkey. Anatolia, as the Greeks referred to Turkey, was not heathen to begin with. It was settled by the righteous children of Noah before they drifted into idolatry. Let's take a look. Anatolia has 3 main parts. As you head west from Armenia and the upper Euphrates River, the first region you go through is Cappadocia. Jews from Cappadocia were in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost in Acts 2. Some became believers and returned to Cappadocia. Peter specifically mentions Cappadocia as one of the regions of Anatolia to which he is sending his first epistle. Paul lived just below Cappadocia on the coast, in Tarsus. The middle part of Anatolia is called Galatia. Paul visited Galatia 3 times. Timothy was from Galatia, and Paul wrote the book of Galatians to those churches. The western part of Anatolia is called Asia, or Asia Minor back then. The Apostle John was imprisoned on the Isle of Patmos off the coast of Asia when he wrote the Revelation of Jesus Christ, addressed to the 7 churches of Asia. Bithynia and Pontus are mountainous regions to the north. Lycia and Cilicia are mountainous regions to the south. Antioch became the 3rd largest city in the Roman Empire, with a population of 500,000, because it was on the Orontes River and could be reached directly by ships. It was also on the overland trade route that connected it to Mesopotamia. If Japheth had said to his brothers, "Let's explore west," they could have walked from the Euphrates River to the Orontes River and the plain of Antioch in 4 to 5 days. The Mediterranean Sea was not that far from the Euphrates in the middle of the Fertile Crescent. 178 early settlements were discovered on the plain of Antioch in the 1930s. About 30 of them were present in the early years. Most of them only measured 2.5 acres. Let me show you Tel Kurdu and Tel Judaidah. Tel Kurdu, shown here, was important in the Halaf period. DNA found there is of the J1 haplogroup, which Jeanson attributes to Japheth. J1 came from J, which has been found in the center of the Fertile Crescent, that is, northwest Iran, the Caucasus, the Armenian highlands, and northern Mesopotamia. J1 traces the expansion of farming. Tel Kurdu is also remarkable because it lies at the extent of the Ubaid expansion, which we shall see in parts 6 and 7 is Babel. Here we see that Kurdu is 670 miles from Eridu as the crow flies, which reveals the powerful influence that Babel had over the world. Tel Judaidah is perhaps the most important site, with a long history. 22 phases have been defined in the region, from Amuk A through Amuk V. Tel Judaidah started in the Neolithic farming period, called Amuk A. Even at that early time, copper was being used in a small way. Cyprus is about 40 miles off the coast of Turkey and 60 miles from Syria, so not that far from the Amuk region. It was Paul's first stop on his first missionary journey. We know that early people could sail because Neolithic farmers were found there and they couldn't walk on water. It's interesting that so-called Paleolithic hunters were not found on Cyprus, but pygmy elephants and rhinoceroses were. Hunters followed the herds into Africa and Europe, but they knew there were no animals on Cyprus because animals can't walk on water. Ingenious farmers, however, took animals to Cyprus on boats so they could raise them in a controlled environment. They introduced sheep, goats, pigs, deer, horses, dogs, and even a cat. Mersin was close to Tarsus, Paul's hometown. It was located below the Taurus Mountains on a river by the sea. Mersin, also called Umak Tepe, had 23 levels, beginning with farming and animal husbandry. They raised sheep, cattle, goats, and pigs. At one point, Mersin had one of the earliest fortifications, but we don't know why. On Paul's first missionary journey after leaving Cyprus, he walked 350 miles from Perga to Derbe, getting stoned and left for dead at Lystra. On this path, he would have passed within 25 miles of Neolithic Hasalar and within 10 miles of Çatalhöyük. At Hasalar, they farmed wheat, spelt, barley, peas, and vetch, and raised cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and dogs. The houses had no doors. People only entered from the roof. Hasalar was abandoned between levels 2 and 1, probably because of the confusion of languages. When it was reestablished, it was heavily fortified, implying that something happened in the interim to make the people more divisive. Çatalhöyük is shown here on the plain of Konya. Konya is another name for Iconium, which was 23 miles away, shown on the horizon here beneath the mountains. The yellow and white lines are the paths that Paul may have taken. Çatalhöyük today is a raised mound in the middle of a patchwork of farms. A river ran through it, dividing two groups, perhaps two early tribes. The population grew to about 2,500 when it was abandoned, presumably at the time of the confusion of languages. People at Çatalhöyük lived in mud brick buildings with smooth plaster walls. There was no space between buildings, so people entered from the roof. They had wheat, barley, peas, almonds, pistachios, and fruit, and raised sheep and perhaps cattle. Out of 2,000 figurines, most were animals, and fewer than 5% were women, dispelling the myth of religious cultism. The people were extremely neat and orderly and treated all people equally. There were no signs of idolatry. More should be made of their clean family living. After leaving Antioch on his second missionary journey, Paul went through 2 mountain passes in Syria and the Sicilian Gates Pass in Anatolia. Then he continued through the interior for a total of 850 miles by the time he reached Troas. I don't know how long it took. Someone hiking 20 miles a day could hike it in 43 days. I used to think that the interior was difficult and nearly impenetrable. Actually, it would have only taken 10 hours to walk from Mersin on the coast to Çatalhöyük. The ancient world wasn't as big as I thought. On Paul's third missionary journey, he walked 700 miles from Antioch to Ephesus. We know that the ancients were great builders from looking at Göbekli Tepe, the ziggurats, and the pyramids. Let's look at them as great explorers as well, quickly mapping out the new world, both by land and by sea. It wasn't long before they were sailing along the coast and settling on Crete and around the Aegean Sea. Obsidian was mined at Nenez Dag and Golu Dag very early in history. Obsidian is a volcanic glass that makes an edge sharper than a metal scalpel. Obsidian is classified as a stone. Welcome to the Stone Age. Archaeologists have measured the mineral content and linked the obsidian from these mines to the settlements shown here. This reveals an extensive trade network over long distances. And why not? They all spoke the same language and belonged to the same family. Pottery is one of the most important finds for an archaeologist, and I have said almost nothing about pottery in the West. We will talk about the three major pottery cultures in Part 6 when we move back to the center and the eastern flank of the Fertile Crescent. If you have learned anything about archaeology, then subscribe to this channel to learn more. The playlist Life After the Flood reconstructs a biblical model of life between Noah and Abraham. This is how archaeology works. It uses known facts to create a hypothetical scenario that is open to scrutiny. I have combined conservative hermeneutics with sound archaeology to create a model for biblical paleoarchaeology. You won't find such a clear and detailed study anywhere else. I promise to keep each video short. If you have learned something about the Bible as history and how God walks with mankind, then subscribe to this channel and tell others about it. I'm on a mission to educate everyone about the most ignored, misrepresented, and crucial period of human history. Join me by educating yourself and by telling others about life after the flood.